Good morning. Today I'm going to be speaking with Dr. Sydne Pomin. She's a board certified doctor of chiropractic, and she's been doing FP now for 2 years. She's been training out of FP Oakland, and she recently got HF certified. So she's going to be coming on, talking about some of her experience with FP, how it's challenged some of her established beliefs, how it's gotten her from being afraid to move to now moving more than ever. And so let's see if she's here. Sydne, if you're here, can you invite yourself to the live? Good
Good
morning.
morning. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so can you tell us how or what led you to pursue getting going to school for chiropractic?
I started, but previously I was in corporate management and thought I was going to, climb the corporate ladder because that's what I had been told that I should do. So I had a pretty significant neck injury in my about my mid-20s and had such an amazing experience with chiropractic. I realized the power of being able to put your hands on somebody and being able to make an impact was something that was really powerful for me. So I quit my corporate job and had to go back to school for a couple years to get some science courses, but found myself as a chiropractor.
How was that? How long were you in corporate?
I was in corporate management for about 4 years.
4 years. Okay, so
Yeah.
it's a good amount of time you're kind of established there. How was it leaving that and then starting something new with kind of going back to school?
I was technically a little bit older when it comes back to like changing a career path and going back to school. So I had some resistance in my world that, you're too old to start this, because for me, it was going to be more of like a 5 year journey because chiropractic school is usually about 3.5 years, but I had a business degree. So I had to go back and take the basic science courses to get into school. So I think for a lot of people that looked a little wild, because you have a good job, you have a path, it's safe. And I just knew that I wasn't going to be happy if I stayed in that role.
I see. And you've been a chiropractor for how long now?
8 years, which I can't really totally fathom, but yeah, it's been about 8 years now.
Yeah, so that's a good amount of time. I'm sure you've
Hmm.
kind of gotten a lot of experience and seen a lot of patients, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So then what talking about some most people when they come to FP they've kind of dealt with injuries, and we found kind of a different people to go with or different therapies or methods to go with, but they don't work. So what injuries did you have, I guess, in the past?
So I've had quite a lot of injuries, which has really dictated kind of the path to get here. So in my teens, I had a back injury that pulled me out of all my sports. And then in my mid 20s, I had what I consider my most significant injury, which was kind of a mystery injury. So I was like, actually just I had been doing traditional training with a trainer about 9 months before that injury. And I had like a deep pull in like my rectus that had like referral pain to my adductors and my labia. And there was strange swelling, and I lost some function of like my hip flexion. And that's kind of right when I was starting to go to chiropractic school. So I went to a medical doctor, a physical therapist, a chiropractor, an acupuncturist, a pelvic floor specialist, and
Wow.
it was a bit of like a mystery injury. It didn't fit any sort of textbook presentation of what anybody had seen, and even seeking out multiple different practitioners with multiple different lenses, that was my injury that really made me very scared to move, just because it was so painful and so inhibiting. After that, I had a shoulder injury, and then I went back to I wanted to get stronger for being a chiropractor, so I went to somebody who was trained in Olympic weightlifting, because at the time you see who looks strong, right? And you see Olympic weightlifters. So I went to her and I expressed, hey, I have this really old injury, I'm afraid. And lo and behold, 3 months later, we're doing a movement, and not only did it re-exacerbate that original injury, but I never got it imaged, but I also believe I had a hip labrum, either severely injured or torn. And so
Wow.
that at that point in time, I'm in my early 30s. I'm just starting my chiropractic career. I'm petrified because I have a physical job, so I can't risk being taken out of work. And that's when I really became movement avoidant. I was just, anything I was doing was flaring up the injury. And that's when I started. I'd been following naughty and functional patterns for about 6 or 7 years, just kind of looking from the outside. And that's when I was like, you know what? I'm going to get the 10-week course. I'm going to start figuring this out. And as I started doing the 10-week course and I started doing the myofascial releases, I started realizing that this injury is based on some like deep fascial adhesions that I have. And so that's when I was like, for me personally, I wanted to work with a practitioner, again, because I had so much fear in my body about the injury that I really wanted to make sure I was supported. And that's when I found Jonathan in Oakland. So shout out to Jonathan. I think he's the best. And I've been working with him weekly ever since.
So to go back a little bit with the back injury that you had, was it in high school, you said?
Mm-hmm.
Where you didn't have as much fear of movement, I guess, back then. Were you still kind of playing sports even though you had that back injury, or did that limit some of your activity as well?
So from a school standpoint, they wouldn't let me participate in sports, and so from there I got more involved in like leadership and like putting on events for the school. And at that point in time, so at the age of 16, when they took an X-ray and an MRI, I had already lost significant disc space at
Wow.
my L3, L4, and L4, L5. And, when I look back at the trajectory and realizing, my body just didn't break down my disc tissue for no reason. I had improper movement patterns from a very young age, obviously. And so I start like connecting these dots. And like when I see teenagers that I'm working with, and I'd have this dream of like, what if they got to learn functional patterns? What if we could intervene at the ages of when we're learning movement and actually teach proper movement? Because I think that I don't think I'm unique. I think a lot of people suffer injuries in their teenage years. Mine just happened to be imaged to the point where the school district said, hey, you're too much of a liability to be playing sports right now. But yeah, it's just been, I feel like I've been on a long journey to find FP.
And then after high school, did you try to be more active even though you had that
I
injury?
did,
You did.
yeah.
What kind of
So
stuff were you doing?
another part of the story is through all of that, I also had I had a what's called a malformation in my brain. So I had about 3 to 5 years where I was navigating another health issue. So I didn't do much at all because I was on seizure medication and I was just kind of trying to function. So exercise wasn't a priority. So by the time I reintroduced exercise in my mid-20s, I had missed this opportunity to build muscle tissue and was kind of starting from scratch. And then I think starting from scratch with, again, traditional training methods set me up, unfortunately, for further injury to have when I was already pretty injury prone.
Did you feel any benefits temporarily from the traditional? Like, did you feel like you were getting stronger? Did you feel like you were getting maybe even a little fitter, like able to move better for some time?
Definitely, yeah. And I kind of like got obsessive about it and went from zero to, working with the trainer 3 times a week and doing spin classes and doing Pilates and doing a whole bunch of cardio. So going from zero to that, and I was in my mid-20s, so you have a little bit of like the youth working in your favor. I definitely noticed that I did get stronger. But then when I had that big injury, and I again became so movement avoidant that I lost a lot of it.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. I used to work out a lot, and then I did it too much, and then when I couldn't work out anymore, it was horrible.
Yeah,
I couldn't move, and then I had to find different ways to try to feel good. So I think a
absolutely.
lot of people experience the same thing. So then you said you kind of did the 10-week course. How was the 10-week course for you? Um, just kind of what was your experience with it? Uh, Go ahead. And
I mean, I loved it just because it started to, that's when I started to really see how FP was connecting the dots with human movement. And I had always looked at chiropractic from a place of like, look, let's look at humans in motion. So when I started to see how these biomechanics were connected to posture, and my profession talks about posture a lot, right? And then I start seeing those connections with posture and the gait cycle, and starting seeing changes in my body that did not come at the expense of more time or more, I didn't feel like I had to do FP all day every day to start seeing results. I started seeing results pretty quickly, and that kind of keeps you motivated to keep going. And I also like really appreciated how Nadi would bring in so many different perspectives in that 10-week course, and it made it very applicable for me to get into.
yeah, and how was that like getting some results of being able to move again from being in a place where you were fearful of moving?
When you go from not trusting your body, and I think when you don't trust your body, that's not only scary on a conscious standpoint, your I feel like my primal brain was always on high alert because I was afraid to move. So the part of my nervous system that's from a primal standpoint, that's always looking to see if I could protect myself if I got attacked from the fake tiger that's going to pop around the corner. um, when I started to trust my ability to move again, that shifted a lot of things for me on an emotional standpoint too, because they're just being in constant fear like that, I think really puts a lot of weight on your system. And when I started to see like, oh, this is not just physical, this is kind of hitting multiple aspects of just being a human being. And that's when I started to really be like, okay, I need to really understand this stuff.
So now, what was it like training with? You said you hit up Jonathan. How was it like? How was your first week or first 2 weeks with him?
So Jonathan and I started very close to like when COVID hit. So we couldn't be indoors at all. There was a lot of restrictions. So we ended up meeting at a park, and we were in a park, and he wrapped bands around a tree, and we started just with like some of the basic motions. And I would say within 2 weeks, my chronic pain was already decreased because doing the 10-week course, but it got down to nearly nothing. And then started seeing physical changes not only in my body, but I noticed changes in the way that I was adjusting. I noticed that I had more capability of like moving heavy things, like if I just had to move a table in my office or something, for that to get easier. That was such a big deal to me, because to find ease in your body, I think that's where FP gets you to as well. So it's not just like, oh, I could muscle through this and like, yes, I'm strong. It's, wow, I can move that easily without having to think about it very much. And that also just creates a lot of independence too, which I really appreciated.
Yeah, what I hear from clients and my experience as well is it kind of starts becoming a subconscious thing that you can just do things and not have to think about, okay, I need to brace my core for this, or I need to
Exactly.
make sure my glutes on when I take that step. It starts to
Exactly.
happen on its own more. Um, what were some of your struggles, or you said you found Nadi at some point, but it took you some time to start. So, uh, what was it that kind of made you hesitate and made you not want to jump on right away?
I think I was still pretty movement hesitant when I found it. And at that point in time, Nadi was putting out a lot of information about the movements themselves. And so, not having the context, I would look at that and be like, that scares me. You know what I mean? Like, I can't, I would, I tell myself, I can't do that. And then he started talking about more about the myofascial release aspect to it. And then the pre and post pictures started to show up. And for me, the pre and like, I consider myself, a bit of a scientist as well. Like, I'm a geek. I always want to keep researching, keep understanding. And when I started seeing not only the static posture, the standing posture photos, but also seeing the before and after gait cycle videos, that's when I was like, could I get my body back again? Could I be able to go play, weekend sports with my friends and not be petrified of it interfering with work on Monday? So that's when I decided to be like, yep, okay, I think that there's something to this here.
Yeah, would you say if someone were to ask you, let's say one of your clients or someone you knew saw a before and after from FP, and they were to ask you, what do you think about this? Are they just standing straighter on the after? Because that's kind of what it looks like. What would you say?
I would say from my lens, like, let's look at how the musculature is actually firing, because it's obvious that the muscles are getting developed to hold that person in space. And I'm not sure if a layperson is going to see that, just based on, how many bodies I've had the opportunity to observe. But for me, I could definitely see changes in the lats and see changes in the erector spinae. That's not somebody sitting up straight. That's somebody who has developed integrity in their system. And then when you start talking about the body from a tensegrity standpoint, that's when the results for me really stood out as well, because this wasn't just about strengthening certain muscles to be able to stand up taller. This, to me, those photos are somebody is engaging in gravity in a completely different environment, in a different way, because of the training mechanisms they've gone through.
Nice. So then you told us a little bit about how it went from the beginning. How is it now? So are you still training with Jonathan?
Yep, I see him weekly. We have our Friday, I call it our Friday morning geek out sessions. And I've chosen to continue to work with him just because I love his brain and the way he sees things, and having somebody be able to observe. I can look at myself in the mirror so much, but he finds we're at this point in time where we're able to start fine tuning things. And I have so much fun at each session because most of our sessions, we're not doing the big ballistic movements. At this point in time, Jonathan and I spend a lot of time in the standing posture and just the initial step of the gait cycle, just trying to fine tune it and fine tune it. And that's what I love about FP is you never stop. And I think with human movement, we're not supposed to stop. We're supposed to be getting better and better and better. And I also think I follow, probably 50, 60 FP people, and like having the opportunity to watch how their bodies are changing, I see the potential of where I get to go. And for me, I learned so much about biomechanics. Like, I've had a lot of training in biomechanics, and I was sharing this with people at the Human Foundations course, that I felt that course was more founded in realistic, applicable biomechanics than anything else I had been exposed to. And first and foremost, I'm concerned about how my patients are engaging in gravity and what is happening with every step that they take, and what is happening in their standing posture, because I know that's where they're either going to make the most positive or negative impact when it comes to the sustainability and longevity of being a human. And the other thing that I see in my practice is I have the privilege of seeing all sorts of different ages of people. And it's like the generation curve is happening at a younger and younger age. Like I'm seeing knees are starting to show arthritic changes in their 30s. I'm seeing 20-year-olds showing up with chronic pain patterns. And for me, it's almost like a bit of an alarm is sounding, and why I'm so grateful that FP is growing and they're getting so many practitioners, because I absolutely love chiropractic. I think the chiropractic adjustment is one of the most powerful things on earth. And if you can't move properly around an adjusted joint, we're just going to be in like a cycle where we're constantly chasing something. And so for me, I say the best way I have to describe it is I can watch people who don't move properly. Their body eventually becomes a cage that they get stuck in. And I think FP is a way to not get stuck in that cage, because that cage is actually taking away quality of life, because most people have to walk away from something they love because they didn't have the tools or the knowledge. And even when they think they were doing everything right, they were still causing damage to their body. And I think that's like the biggest message here is, if you want to be healthy in today's society, you have to be your own advocate for your health.
Yeah, I
So that
think
was a long answer to that.
yeah, and we kind of touched on it, but there's a social media misconception with what we see online, and like you said, the dynamic movements of people moving around. But it is much the way we get you there and the way we build the foundation first. That's where FP really stands out, and it's hard for people to see that. So I appreciate you sharing your perspective. I think it's going to help.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so then now, how's your life different after doing FP for 2 years, reducing your pain? Have you been able to move more now, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm 30, I'm 38 years old, and I just recently joined a flag football league. And if you would have told me 2 years ago, like, hey, you're going to play flag football, I would have laughed at you, because I had the belief system that I couldn't do that. I can't run like that. I can't, make quick movements with rotation like that. I can't take, even though it's flag football, there is some contact, so you have to be able to have enough integrity to be able to take a push and a hit. And so that brought me so much joy, not only from like physical, I get to move, but I was looking to find more community. So because of FP, I'm able to go out and make community. And because of FP, I don't have anxiety and fear in my body like I did before. And now I get to kind of be like, how do I get to optimize my body? Like, how can I make myself faster when I'm running? How can I make it so I can take a faster turn when I'm playing these sports? And just to be able to have access to, I got sports taken away from me when I was very young. And to be able to access that again in my late 30s is, I think, a gift that I can't even fully articulate what it means to me.
And from your perspective, what were some of the beliefs that were that you had, I guess, during your chiropractic profession the past 8 years, and how has that been challenged and how has that been changed till now? I know there's people sometimes that they, like you said, they get into the cycle and they'll go see a massage therapist or an acupuncturist or a chiropractor, and they get stuck in a cycle and they're actually not really getting better. So what are some things that have changed in these past few years?
Yeah, so I think a lot around posture, right? I think we learn posture as looking at it from a limited lens of just like skeletal structure, and that bones, aren't, that doesn't have a full range of motion. So if I restore the movement from a joint standpoint, that I can impact posture. I've definitely seen that happen. And then I start questioning the sustainability of it. Somebody, in my opinion, shouldn't have to see me, multiple times a week forever to maintain that. So how are you maintaining that? I feel like it's my responsibility, and part of my practice is teaching people, sustainable movement ways to maintain adjustments. So I think that was like a very important piece for me. And second is kind of just expanding for me personally outside of like just the bone and joint and looking at it more from like a fascial standpoint and really being able to bring that and observe that in my patients. Like every single one of my patients comes in, we talk about neutral posture. Every single one of my patients that come in, like I'm palpating their whole body and looking for those common myofascial restrictions in there. And really understanding that, my role is to use like a therapeutic intervention of chiropractic to get somebody moving through their transition a bit faster. But I want them to not have to depend on me. If you're just coming back to me over and over again to get adjusted to manage pain, I become a very expensive ad bill, and that doesn't really serve my values of how I want to work with people. I want people to be able to use chiropractic as a therapeutic intervention and then get tools on top of that now that their body's moving better, now that they have access to more like rib cage motion because we've got some solid adjustments through the mid back. Then we could start talking about like, now how are you moving the 23.5 hours you are not in this office? And that I think is such an important conversation I'm having with my patients on a daily basis.
Yeah, and I don't think people realize that you can create the mechanical levers inside of your body to help you maintain those the new positions of your bones, and even deeper into that, how we can start to pull on the bones so the structure of the bones themselves can eventually change. You mentioned that you consider yourself a trauma-informed practitioner. Can you expand on that and kind of from that perspective, what your thoughts are on what FP might be doing in a deeper level?
Absolutely, yeah. So I think in some way or the other, we all have trauma in our body. And, that could be physical, that could be mental, that can be emotional. I often talk to my patients that the pandemic in and of itself has been a trauma that we've all had to navigate through. So if my body is in trauma, a lot of times it goes into protection. And I find that the pattern of that often looks like rolled shoulders, hunched over, like almost like we're protecting our heart. And so I think that there's a lot of science coming out right now that fascia actually is one of the main primary things that stores trauma. And so when we start opening up fascia and we start like for me personally, when I started going after some of the fascial adhesions that got me to that original injury, I had to navigate a whole host of emotions that were coming with that. There was fear, there was anxiety, there was feeling hopeful, there was feeling, do I really want to go to this next level? And so having that awareness of how trauma shows up in our body and how I could be working on a physical body and somebody can have an emotional response, I think is a huge, huge thing that we're going to start seeing with FP, because I think what FP is going to do is allow people to also have more access to their fascial system, and that will help release trauma in the body. And that will also, and I see this again with like people in their like late teens to mid 20s struggling with a lot of anxiety and depression. And while that's a multifaceted aspect, I think that if we can get people with more structural integrity and we can get their fascial system running and firing like it should be, I think that will at least remove a significant layer that doesn't always get as considered. Because if you think about it, right, if my rib cage isn't moving because, my fascial system is just completely shut down, again, the brain is going into the brain doesn't feel safe in that position. And if our brain doesn't feel safe, absolutely we're going to feel more anxiety, and absolutely we're going to feel more depression, because again, my brain only cares about if I'm safe. It doesn't really care if I'm thriving. So we teach the brain safety in lots of ways, but I think one of the ways is having a fascial system that engages with gravity so the brain doesn't have to constantly be monitoring that.
Yeah, we spoke about that earlier with the unconscious. If you're doing a movement, it's kind of an unconscious ease of doing that, and it's kind of the same thing. If you're changing that unconscious movement, you're probably changing the unconscious restriction or association that you had in the fascia when you experience a
Exactly.
trauma.
Exactly. Yep.
So to go a little bit into the mental aspect of it, you mentioned feeling sort of in a meditative state while doing some chambers specifically. So can you talk a little bit about that?
I can, because this was like when I realized this was happening, this was again one of like the big aha moments I had around FP, because I've never been I think meditation is extremely powerful, and I've never been somebody who has been able to stick with a meditation practice, sitting on a cushion and being able to just meditate, excuse me, has just been something I've always really struggled with. And I made it into, oh, there's something wrong with me. My brain isn't strong enough. Like I'm not good at meditating, so that means there's something wrong with me. And then it was probably like 9 months into FP, and started when we were doing like pendulums.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized, there's so much happening in those pendulum movements. Like I'm so cognitive, so I'm always kind of like trying to be like, how's my pec firing? What's my lat doing? Is my right oblique on? And Jonathan was like, just kind of let it happen. And I'm like, okay. And this was again like talking about trusting your body too, that my body could figure this out. And so we started doing pendulums, and I stopped and I looked at him and I was like, I kind of feel like I was meditating. And he's like, yeah. And then I started to think about it, right? And how movement feeds information into the brain. And then I listened to that podcast last week with Nadia and Carrie, and she was talking about flow states. And it's like, I think that's like a whole nother world that can be explored, is those flow states that when you've hit a flow state, it does feel meditative. And maybe we can introduce people to a concept of meditation that is more than just sitting on a cushion. I think that sitting and being still has a lot of powerful benefits. And I'd also like to give people different tools to be able to access their levels of consciousness that they might feel that they don't have access to because they don't resonate with a certain type of intervention.
Yeah, also in a way, when you're doing an exercise with FP, we're trying to account for a lot of variables, so it can get somewhat stressful.
Mm-hmm.
Something that I end up telling my clients is to kind of try to lower the stress level down as they're going through the motion, so they're reassociating them, creating new tensions, but also being more calm, not being so neurotic in that position.
Absolutely.
And that really is what's going to create, like whenever you're stressed in life, you're not going to be able to sit down and close your eyes and try to meditate and get into that mental state. It's happening while you're being stressed. So yeah, there's definitely something to say about that.
Yeah, and being able to maybe remove some of those initial layers so that you could sit down and get into like the quiet meditative place. And maybe that's why some people struggle with it, is because their system is already firing too much. So being able to have better movement is going to give you the ability to access those benefits as well, if somebody's interested in going down that road.
100%.
All
Yeah.
connected. It's all connected.
Yeah. If you can move better, you can rest better. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people has your sleep gotten better? Would you say?
Totally. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, especially after like when you have like a good FP workout and you realize it. And I find it interesting because I'm never like sore like I was with like traditional weightlifting. Like, you'd go do squats and then your quads and your glutes would be sore the next day. I'm never sore like that. I talked to Jonathan about this a lot too. I feel like I'm fascially fatigued in a good way. Like my whole body has this different feeling and tension to it. And then the recovery from that is so much faster, because I can't go and do big workouts where I get super sore and then go and work the next day, because it's going to impact my ability to give a good adjustment. Like if my bicep is like sore and just has total DOMs in it, it's going to be tougher for me to do my work, and I can't afford that. So FP gives me the ability to be more sustainable through my work as well.
Yeah, and I think since we address the whole system, we're not trying to fatigue just one part of the body.
Mm-hmm.
And also the yeah, you don't, let's say if you went out for a sprint and you moved well, you get that same kind of effect.
For sure.
Usually when people work out and they can only use certain parts of their body, then that's why certain things get sore and that's why they can't rest well. So I feel that as well. And what I get from clients too is saying how they need to either take a nap or chill for a bit. We were joking that after sessions, clients like to hang around and talk a little bit just before they get in their cars, because they're
Just like let it all sink in.
sink in. Yeah, exactly. Great. So, anything else that you want to add? Thanks again for coming on.
No, I'm really grateful for the opportunity to have this conversation. I think that there is so much benefit in finding commonality, and I think at the end of the day, we just want people to have access to the freedom of their body. And I feel that if you're on the fence about FP, like, this is the fastest and most efficient way to get to that freedom. Like, the pain isn't, we don't want to be in pain. We want to be able to perform, but there's this freedom aspect of, and that's what I've always put on my applications when I'm filling out like, what does FP mean to you? It means freedom. So I'm just really grateful to be able to talk with you today about all of this.
Yeah, and I see a couple chiros here in the comments have been saying that they either do FP or they're wanting to try FP. So I'm sure your perspective is going to help a lot of people. So yeah, again, thank you so much for coming on.
If anybody has questions, reach out to me. I'm happy to chat with anyone.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks everyone again for tuning in. We'll be back on Sunday. And thank you, Dr. Sydney.
Absolutely.
Yeah, looking forward to your progress.
Awesome. Have a great one.
Thanks. Bye.